call it Nordcrawl, but this is actually a sales pitch because I want more friends to join into Horizon 2020 program. So then it could be Eurocrawl. That is so. Come to me afterwards, and I will tell you everything. So what if we actually could watch the market at any instant, like in real time, to check what's on the market and see how it behaves? Some company makes a campaign, and then suddenly what's on sale change, and you can see that. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Yes. Yes. You were supposed to say. Okay, so Nordcrawl is a Nordic project. It's a collaboration between the Nordic countries where we try to, use what we call web crawler, a web scraping tool to see can we use it to improve the effectiveness of market surveillance. Some details about how it's organized. We continue the work. And then I discussed, I think most of you knew Stuart Jeffcott. So I challenged him with this presentation and see if he understood what I meant, and he didn't. So actually this new version, because some of you have already seen it, this is actually after discussion with Stuart. So just to begin, what it isn't, the Nordcrawl isn't the actual crawling, the crawler walking around. Instead, what it is a sophisticated tool for cleaning, sorting, linking, and analyzing crawl data. That is the Nordcrawl. And then what it does for us is actually we can learn more about what's on the market, what's for sale on the market. And then it makes it easier for us to take decisions when we do market surveillance. And actually, I will not touch upon that so much today. It can also help us to do improved policy making. I can answer some questions later on, but I will focus on the market surveillance part. So one thing it can do, for example, is just what's on the market today, right now. We just go out and crawl, and then we store it and check. So then we can decide as a market surveillance authority, what should we done, where should we target our market surveillance. I'm coming from the Swedish Energy Agency, as I said before, and we also do the market surveillance. And this is a everyday decision we have to make. When we contact companies and ask about their products, we have to sort of make a selection. And that is based on the information we have on the market or of the market. But I mean, we can also be more selective, targeted sampling. If we suspect that some products don't comply, we can target them. So there are different strategies for different reasons. The top there could be if you want some statistics, how many products don't comply. Whereas this is more, we really want to go for the big sharks. So that is, so you can do both then. And then what we also can see is how does the market evolve over time. That I think myself is a really intriguing thing. We can follow how the market behaves. Let's say after a requirement comes into force, what is the market respond? Do the market start to change even before or just at the time when the requirement comes into force? And that will vary depending on the product, because some products, the exchange rate are not that fast, whereas other products like ICT or Lysos, there are new products on the market several times every year. Or we can see how market comes and goes. There were some products on the market, but then suddenly they're gone, and then we can see what are the new entrants. So it actually gives us a better understanding of the market dynamics as well, which we think is interesting. Then we can do things like, it's crawling, it's analyzing, and then the tool can actually flag automatically. It seems like there are some non-compliant products. I mean, if you have a Ford light source here, 60 watts, it's probably incandescent. Should be gone, shouldn't it? So then it can just alert us, and then we go and ask Ford, why do you provide this light source? Another thing which we found, which is of interest, and Chris, you paved the way for this argument, is good to collaborate. Some products are the same on the different markets, although it can be tricky to understand because the model number, there will be some extension, or TVs, for example, blah, blah, is very long model number, but there are some slight differences. And then it turned out, and we have a lot of examples of that, we actually understood now, some TVs, it's the same TV sold on different markets. So then we can discuss, maybe Iceland, can you check it? You go to a lab and you check it, and then we share information. Whereas we say, okay, we take care of that refrigerator that seems to be common in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. So that I think is also a powerful thing to enhance collaboration and spend your resources in the best possible way. So in like a list of advantages as far as we see it is that we can reduce cost for data collection. We do spend some money on that, the traditional data sources, and we do also we sit and check what's on the market really literally. We think we can say we have a high coverage and good representation of the markets. And then, as I said before, the real-time aspect is also interesting, because if some products comes and goes very quick, maybe they leave very quickly, maybe we shouldn't spend time on that. Or should we engage with that? If it's the same retail all the time, do it in a systematic way. And they're non-compliant all the time, we can start to have a dialogue with them and say, it seems like you're not aware of the regulations. There are a set of regulations called energy labeling and Ecodesign. There are a lot of retailers like that. Etc. Automatic checks, and then, as I said, opportunities for enhanced cross-border cooperation. So we think that this tool has a lot of promises. Overall, improved effectiveness of market surveillance. So we continue to work on this. At the same time, we investigated, and I think that's actually how it started to begin with. We were more interested in policy evaluation. Ecodesign says that we should say this and this, and we had the pre-studies, and we know what is supposed to say on the EU market. We were not that sure how it actually, what is the case for Sweden. And you can do a lot of things, like you can divide by population or by GDP or things like that, but we're not satisfied with that. So actually we think this is where we started. It's a little bit more tricky though, because you have to understand also the sales volumes, and that you don't get immediately from the web crawler data. But you can see that policy actually has an effect. You can see how it evolves over time, that they will improve. And then if you can combine it with sales volumes, you can get that information from other, in other ways. Then you can start to do the energy saving calculations as well. Or you can check other parameters as well. So that's also very interesting. Or you can see that we have actually things like this, a lot of tropical fridges on the Swedish market. It's very warm in Sweden. You should come. So why are they so keen on selling tropical fridges? Yeah, you can discuss that. And then you can do really a lot of other kind of analysis. So these are examples that we sort of try to analyze. Sales by energy class, sales by technology, consumption by technology. You can do a lot of stuff actually. But I promised I shouldn't spend too much time on that today. But it's really interesting, really interesting. So this tool is under development. We continue to do it on the Nordic market, and that will become a regular activity in together with the Nordic colleagues. We also learned that we try to do all products. We crawl whatever we can. And we just found that the information available are different for different products, of course. It depends on what's on the web, basically. But there are also some other challenges, and that is due to the information that is required by Ecodesign, for example. So we just try to learn that. But I think it has given us at least some new insights that we didn't know. We are also working more to, algorithms to do the non-compliance, to really identify. And that what is hidden here is that actually if you combine different pieces of information, you can see it's not reasonable, cannot be the case that if you take this parameter and put in the equation, cannot lead to this energy class, for example. So you can do some gross estimate and say this information doesn't make sense. There must be something wrong in the information they provide, or it's actually they're non-compliant and they just pretend to be better. So that is also very interesting. And then, as I said, we would, in the longer term, we will spend more time on this then, a separate tool to do the real-time policy evaluation. And then also coming back to Hans Paul's, when you do set the actual requirements, you can use real-time data maybe. Maybe the least lifecycle cost point is not relevant all the time, but you can at least see how it moves in time. That's interesting, I think. Yeah, and then the product database system is coming to Europe. We are thinking about how this could help support it, or we can have a mutual collaboration. It's early thoughts, but we discovered that other regions, they do that. They both have a product database and they do web crawling to either check that the products are actually registered as they should, or that they actually can get some complementary data that was not supplied to the product database. So US, Canada, Australia does this. So it's interesting for us too, I think. So yeah, I'm here for sell pitch. So my boss tells me that, Peter, you spend too much money on this. You should collaborate with others in EU. So please come to me afterwards, and then you can join us, and we do this fantastic Horizon 2020 project. And I was supposed to produce a 2-pager. I started to do that you can bring to your bosses. It's only in Word so far. It will be PDF and nicely laid out. Why does this always come up? So if you want sort of the short story, you can get this later. It will be on your webpage on the conference, PDF and very nicely laid out. You take it to your boss and then you say, shouldn't we join? And he or she will say yes. And then you come to me. Okay, this was the only time ever I will sell anything. I'm a poor salesman, but anyway, I stop here. So questions on the tool?
Thank you.
Well, you did a nice sales pitch, but of course the important question is, what are the costs? Can you give any indication on if you go for instance, this further development and crawling data for a product, what would be an indication of the costs?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can say what we have spent so far. After initial costs, we had to develop the software. We have spent like 40,000 euros to keep it running and develop the tool and then scrape all this data and save it. But I think if we do pool together, and that was actually paid by the Nordic countries, so it's not the Swedish, it's the total cost shared then between 5 countries. So if there are more countries, I think the cost per country, well, you can do it yourself then, 40,000-50,000 euro, and then divided by the number of countries. So it's nothing really. You can afford it. It's affordable. And the Netherlands, you should be joining us.
Maybe both, yeah. So in parallel, the European Commission is developing a product database under the Energy Efficiency Labeling Regulation. So which should be comprehensive and should cover the whole European market with all its products. So therefore the question is, what is then the room to maneuver still for the web crawler approach? Why is this then needed in parallel, or how will this be interlinked?
As far as I understand, the product database is in, well, EU and as it is set up in US and Australia and others, it's like a one-time entry. You register when you put it on the market, but that's the information you have. So you don't really follow it later on. What we can do, right now we have set it up for a weekly download. So we get the real-time aspect, so we can see how the market moves. And then, as I said, some products actually leaves the market also. So I think that is the difference between the product database that we are discussing now in EU. And then, sorry? Price we also get. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me, Netherlands. Yeah, we also get the price information, the purchase price, which obviously I thought that was included in the EU product database. But that is a crucial thing, because then we can also follow how the purchase price have to be. There has been a sloppy use of price so far. Price and cost. I mean, purchase price plus running cost. So we can follow that as well. So I think that is the main difference and main advantage also. But I think I see it as a complementary thing, because probably in the product database in Europe, you will get more information, or the hidden information that we probably won't find on the web page. Because for us, it's important to point out this is a tool to help us do the market surveillance. It's not the actual market surveillance. So when we find an indication, we do enter into a formal process. We contact the retailer or manufacturer and then ask for information. And it could be that they comply. Sometimes they mislabel, but in the wrong direction. They were better than they said they were.
Thank you, Peter. Let me see if I can help you sell some more.
Yes.
I was thinking about prices, but also one thing that won't be in the database is any information about sales volumes.
No,
so I was wondering if, well, the popularity, if there could be some indication of the volumes without exact sales numbers, of course, but some indication.
Yes, and one of our colleagues not present today, Robert van Buskirk, that worked at DOE and now is working NRV, or I'm not sure. Well, he said that if you have access to the total number of sales of a product group, then you can use the popularity index like Price Runner or things like that, and then you can do a mathematical estimate of the distribution of models, and then you can get an idea of how many per model that was actually sold. So I think that is we will explore that. We actually did some trials and checked with some other data, and probably could work. And also you can use the numbers from the customs. Depends on the system of how you label all the models. Then you can also actually depends on the granularity, if it's good enough. But the point is that you need to spend some more time to do that. It's not that straightforward. And then the final thing is also coverage. If the web crawler actually captures all models or not. Maybe not all have information on the net, so things like that also comes into play.
Mike Schollen from CLASP. I was going to say, Peter, another opportunity for market surveillance is to compare the product registry database with the models you're finding on the web, and make sure everything is listed.
Yes.
Which I don't know if that's done. Well, it's not done today because there isn't a product registry database, but once that's done, that could happen electronically.
Yeah, and that is how US is doing it too.
Stamatis Ividos from the EASME European Commission. Thank you, Peter, for this very useful presentation. I'd just like to point you in the direction of the Horizon 2020 Work Program 2018, which was adopted last year. In the annex of that, you'll find a grant to identified beneficiaries, which has been set up for market surveillance authorities to undertake joint actions on market surveillance in the product policy field. So you may want to talk to your boss about that and get involved in that grant for market surveillance authorities.
Thank you. I will do that.
Otherwise, let me just start. If I ask each speaker, starting with you, Peter, what is the most important thing to move forward in progressive eco-design?
I think, well, for those of you who are here in the morning, I think we need to be much more progressive. I think we really need to communicate the need for speed. And then, I mean, now I'm a dreamer, I know that. But I was also discussing with Hans Paul for the ICT, what Hans Paul didn't say, the T0 and the T1, you can do the reverse thing. You can define how fast can I get something into force, and then I go backwards and take the average from there. That would be an interesting thing just to check. So it would be a reverse process. How fast can I get the new regulations into place? And then I start from there. Because I think we're way too slow. And then I think also, we discuss standardization processes to also, I mean, it's relevant for industry as well, and they sit on all the knowledge to really also make them to help us to increase speed in the standardization work, because we really need them. We need the standardization layer. That's the foundation of everything. Product definition, product categories, test methods. We need all this. Otherwise, we cannot regulate and we cannot market enforce either. So I would prioritize the need for speed.
Well, I can add, I think, and combine with what Ellen said about the impact of more software and more connectivity. And I focused on ICT products, but I said that is a general characteristic. And Chris showed a nice picture of a water heater providing multiple program options. So that's an example where indeed the ICT characteristics invade also, you could say, the classical products which, say, 10 years ago had a single operating mode, and you tested them and you got an efficiency figure, and maybe you did some part load test, and that is it. And I fear that if we continue that simple approach, that as Ellen said, our tests and the requirements will not be relevant. So we need to think about how to incorporate these things into into revisions. And well, luckily there is certainly for the revision of water heaters and boilers, maybe contrary to Peter's need for speed, but there is some time to investigate that, and that is a good thing, because what you see is that indeed regulations and standard, as Chris said, they also very much drive product development and product optimization. For instance, what we can learn from washing machines is that the current regulation on washing machines is based on, say, a mix of 2 programs. And at the time the regulation was decided upon, these were, you could say, quite ordinary programs, 2 of the many that a washing machine had. But because they were selected to be the programs to get the label and to meet the minimum efficiency requirements, of course manufacturers optimized these programs with that aspect. So these programs became very, very efficient, but also in some cases took 4, 5 and sometimes even 6 hours to complete. Which then fired back because no normal consumer, at least only very few consumers, wanted to use these programs. So again, that is also a part, the dynamics of setting requirements and how industry will react, and you can't say that is a kind of illegal thing or so. No, they rightly optimized on an important parameter, but then when setting the requirements, you should indeed take into account that there's more than energy efficiency, and in order to get the efficiency in practice, you should indeed take also other aspects into account, and that becomes will become indeed more complex. So I'm also looking forward to other discussions today and tomorrow in how we can, given this trend on one hand of more complexity, how on the other hand, what are the ways to cut down on complexity and maybe on some other aspects get it a bit more simple in order to keep it manageable.
Great. Chris, you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, along the lines of what Hans-Paul said, it's speaking of testing standards is difficult to rise from the dungeons of hell again, but I guess it's we may not need to always go down there. It's we can focus on the low-hanging fruit, on ways to smartly try and make our test standards more representative and avoid circumvention. The arguments of costs and resources and time are valid arguments, and we need to look into them more in depth. But my feeling is that considering the impact that the test methods are having in the final outcome of our regulations and the expected savings we are looking into, these topics do not yet have sufficient prominence in the discussions. They should be on the main tables.
Great. Any more comments from the floor? I can. Yo, if you.
I'll steal yours. Okay, then you can trade. This is a question maybe for Chris. And just from my experience, I worked on the US DOE as a contractor on regulations. And one of the things the US does differently from Europe is the Department of Energy sets the test methods for products. So the DOE takes control of that. They hire consultants, technical experts, they're drafted, published, and there's a comment period. And comments are provided by both sides, by industry as well as by the environmental organizations. And I wondered, here in Europe, you're sort of in some ways held to ransom by the standardization bodies. And there's a process that's followed with Sensenelec, and the Commission funds their work, and they move at the pace that they're prepared to move at. And so you can't always put things in place that you want to. So I wondered if anyone's looked at that in Europe, and if people have, any of the speakers have comments on perhaps getting some of the academics and experts in this room to draft and offer test methods that Sensenelec could adopt.
Representing an environmental NGO in standards is, I mean, you have to get used to being the minority in the meetings and representing interests that are not the minority in society. But of course, the standardization process, as it is defined by the standardization regulation, is well defined. The balance of interest is far from perfect indeed, and instead of instead of having a revolution, I would definitely agree with you that there are parts and elements of test procedures that have a very strong political, let's say, element to them. So under the technical coating lie political decisions, and it is very often the case that we don't treat those elements and aspects on the regulatory side. So I would indeed agree with you and argue that the choice of modes, the choice of programs, consistency amongst testing the different aspects, not just test, with some conditions, the freezing capacity and energy consumption with different conditions, are elements that should discussed, and the most appropriate platform to discuss these, even with their technical complexity, is the regulatory process. Thank you.
Maybe to add, I think since the revision of Ecodesign, the situation is maybe not as black and white as you pictures, Michael, because the Commission, indeed, after very bad experience with standardization, which the Commission was held ransom by some committees, and even for some products, committees changed the standard after the regulation was set so that products could achieve a better rating. So after these experience, there is the possibility to have what is called transitional test methods written in the regulation. And for quite a number of products, the Commission uses this method and then provides a mandate to the Standardization Committee to incorporate this transitional method in a standard. And yes, that's how it works in Europe. And indeed, as you know, in other places in the world, it works different. And yes, there are indeed cultural differences, and of course it's good to be able to learn from how the US or how Japan or Australia takes these things up, but that's it's always a bit tricky to try to just copy one-to-one. Also, as I said, compared to DOE, the budget in Europe for preparatory studies, then including work on test methods, I think is a tenth of what DOE spends. So also these boundaries need to take into account, and of course we can, as the stakeholders and interested bodies, both industry and public authorities, NGOs, can ask the Commission to spend more money on this. But on the other hand, political reality is that in the capitals, nobody is willing to provide more money to Brussels. So these kind of things also play a role, and so I think there is in my experience, a kind of now workable balance in Europe on the standards, although a standardization process is, as Chris said, a typical process. It's not very fast moving. So yes, that is one of the realities to deal with.
That is that having IASME here and having these technical experts and academics and researchers here, maybe there's a Horizon 2020 project that could be proposed for certain products that have a need for something like this that can be offered into standardization, where there's been a lot of delays, or with, you need some social studies and you need to have samples and testing and get that fed into the process. So yeah, that was sort of the idea. Cool, thank you.
I've been hearing the conversations and thinking a bit about what this means for eco-design. And we've been talking a lot about test procedures recently and testing and how you can improve that. The reality also is that maybe a handful of projects get tested on the European market, and there's tens of thousands of products out there. You can, of course, improve that, and maybe we should, but we'll never get full coverage. There are economies that have moved to an entirely different system, like requiring that products are tested before they're put on the market. Europe doesn't do that. Test procedures have their loopholes, and you can repair those. You often see those loopholes becoming more relevant in iterations of standards. The refrigerator loopholes became far more dominant in the second or third iteration. The washing machines one also. For televisions we have a loophole. Pretty much every product has a loophole at some point in time. What I remember from impact calculations about eco-design and labeling is that the biggest gains are made at the beginning, when you start covering products that are not covered at all. And that's true in Europe. It's also true in many other countries around the world. And I wonder, if we're talking about the future of eco-design, how we can make sure that we keep up with products as they develop. And Hans Paul, I think, made some quite relevant comments about products becoming more complex and having more functionality. The average washing machine also is almost a computer. It does something different every time. And how do you deal with that in a world that has more product development quicker and quicker? Most product types are on the market for a few months now, and then type number changes. Simple compliance checking doesn't even keep up. Many compliance checking authorities find out that by the time they've checked the product, it's actually no longer on sale. So are we really talking about the thing we should be talking about, or should we be talking about ways to make eco-design faster, make sure it covers more, it responds faster to the market, and it stimulates innovation? Because in the end, we need energy efficiency. We don't need compliance.
Oh, good
Just
points.
a few views.
Good points. Does anyone want to reply something here? Or?
I thank you. I don't have the solution. It's very interesting points, but I would say that this is rather an argument to be more considerate and careful when defining test methods, rather than the opposite. If you have complexity, if you have new functionalities and innovative technologies, you might run also in the opposite risk of diverging more between what you expected and what you see in the field. So I would consider that actually also a call for more consideration of this aspect, always taking into account the resources and where it should be better prioritized. But these new functionalities and the fact that the Internet of Things and these concepts can actually provide opportunities, as Alan Meyer mentioned earlier, and others. So,
yeah, good points. And I think also in the big perspective, I guess we can see that the MEPs have gained more, how shall I put it, especially Nordic industries are rather positive towards the Ecodesign Directive. But as soon as tomorrow we start to talk about resources, new types of standards creates uncertainty. And then you start all over again. And of course, once you have these standards for 10 years, there's more acceptance, of course. So, yeah.
Chris mentioned energy reporting as a possibility. And energy reporting means that the appliance is connected to the internet and reports to some central entity its behavior, and implicitly its energy consumption. And this is actually a little bit Orwellian and perhaps objectionable from a privacy perspective, but let's ignore that for a moment and also consider its advantages, because there may be situations where you may say, the test procedures are getting too complicated and too slow, and they depend too much on some of the connected behavior and the software behaviors of a device. So let's just use the reported value that comes back from the product to give a second label. So you may have something what you might call a provisional label that's based on a very simple laboratory test, and then later on you start assembling data about that product's performance in the field, its actual performance. And so that consumers can see two labeled values in effect. One is the simple label value, a label based on a simple test, and then a value based on what actual people were discovering in the field with in actual usage. And those two combined may be a way to provide useful information and some sort of market surveillance and some sort of way of not going into the details of this exceptionally complex test procedure. The drawback is, how do you collect that information? And I'll leave that to somebody else.
Good. So we have self-reporting for industry, and soon we have self-monitoring from products, and tomorrow we'll talk about self-disassembling products.
Thank you. Matteo Rambaldi from CSED, which is an association representing in Brussels the household appliance industry. I've heard many times washing machine, vacuum cleaner, so we represent all of them. There are companies here, LG, Samsung, Electrolux, that participate to our association. They are our members. And I think it is worth mentioning that when we talk about real user behavior, how consumer use appliances, I think just to inform you that CSED, together with the members, have collected some money, so paid by the members, to run studies to see how users use the appliance, because standards and legislation need to be linked. The standard should come before, the legislation should come after, to make sure that the legislation is based on relevant standard, but to make sure that user behavior is monitored. So we're running this study, one for vacuum cleaner and one for tumble dryers. We have an external consultant who's asking consumer how they use appliance, when they get rid of them, how many times they repair it, how they use it at the beginning, how they use it at the end, do they fill the bag, do they change the bag every second day or every second month. So I just wanted to inform you, invite anybody who's interested in participating to the study. I think Chris is participating, so thank you very much for spending your time. But I know Chris is also very busy, and we would like to have more people from the civil society that participate, that come and say, okay, I think this question should be asked in a different way, because we want to know this and that and that. So we have started these two projects, so the first result should be ready in April and will be given to the Commission and to the other stakeholders to make sure that the legislation that are developed are based on real facts, so how consumers really behave. And just for information, if anybody is interested in participating for the future study, designing the question and giving comment to the question and to the results, we are more than happy to welcome you.
Thank you very much.